Hi, everyone. This is Rich Berliner from Charged Up, here today with Ray Kaiser from Evoke Systems. And Ray and I were recently at an event, and I heard him speak. And one of the things that struck me was how important software is to the process of electric vehicle charging, especially in fleet charging. And so I asked Ray to join us today on the podcast because I see him as kind of the guru of that. And Evoke System seems to have a very ambitious and very full functioning set of software, and a lot of folks are using it, and it has a lot of features. So we're going to talk about that today with Ray. But Ray, I'll let you introduce yourself and talk about your background yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you've done before this and up to now, and a little bit about Evoke Systems and what you guys are doing.
Well, great. Well, so I just want to thank you, Rich, for having me on the show. I'm Raymond Kaiser. I'm the co-founder and chief innovation officer for Vogue Systems. We provide charge network management software that works on a wide variety of chargers. I've been in the energy and environmental space for over 20 years. I've done a lot of work with the National Energy Labs and continue to work with the National Energy Labs because, quite frankly, Rich, we ain't seen nothing yet. We're going to see a lot of changes across not only EV charging, but as part of EV charging, the big investment in batteries is going to move us towards energy storage. And more people are recognizing that the old model of centralized generation, transmission, and distribution may not be the right model when we think about the power industry. One thing I oftentimes note is that if you look at the largest capital investment in the world, it's the electric power industry, it's the oil and gas industry, and it's the automotive industry. And these three industries are in the process of colliding, which is really why I say we ain't seen nothing yet.
That's interesting, Ray. And so, what struck me about our discussions was the fact that most people, companies that are rolling out charging, and even fleet managers and things, really don't have an appreciation for how important the software piece of this. So, just a couple of examples. I've run into situations in my charging career so far where everything on paper looks like it works well. This charging station and this bus and this software all work nicely together. And then you get the bus hooked up and it doesn't work. So software is really an art form, it seems to me, in this situation. Talk to that about, sort of the process of making sure that things are compatible. I would assume that's a big part of what you consider.
So certainly the answer is yes. And one thing I just would note, Rich, is we're still in the early days of this industry. So although electric vehicles have been around for a decade, there's still a lack of maturity across the value chain. And so when I talk across the value chain, I'm in the EV charging manufacturers, the automotive industry, the buyers of charging stations and electric vehicles, and the software providers such as ourselves. So there's a lot of shaking out that is really an inevitable part of an industry maturing.
Right.
And so when I think about the difficulty of making sure that things all work together, that's really where the effort around standardization becomes particularly important.
Yeah, so I come from the communication side, the cell phone business, Raymond. And one of the interesting things about that was that 30 years ago, I was at a conference recently and I said, the charging industry reminds me of the cell phone business 30 years ago, because the compatibility issue was monstrous. The certain phones didn't work on certain systems, and this manufacturer of the gear that ran the network wasn't compatible with this phone that was on the network. So there's a lot of that happened. So I so much relate back to those days. And I think you're absolutely right. We are in the infancy here. But one of the things that's so fascinating about this is the fact that what you've been talking about is not only just the software compatibility, but it's also the data capture. And that seems like something that before running into you that event, I really hadn't been exposed to how much data could be captured on all the things that go into a fleet charging setup. So can you talk a little bit about that? And it seems like Evoke Systems is one of the leaders in that kind of data capture.
It's interesting because when we think about really creating value over time, the more information that we have that's really grounded in reality, the better decisions that we can make. And so in today's day and age, it's really easy to collect a lot of data. And all of the charging manufacturers and all of the charging station network operators collect a lot of data. The question is can you make that data into a form that's actually very usable in terms of when are you charging? How long are you charging? What's the cost of electricity when you charge? I think one thing we will certainly see is that the time and location value of energy will shift dramatically over the next 5 years, because utilities will be hard pressed to make the capital investments on the distribution network to accommodate this fast growth, not only of EV chargers, but as we move from propane and natural gas to heat pumps, when we add on these big data centers, the capital investment utilities will need to make will be fairly significant. If you think about buying a hotel, reserving a hotel room or buying an airplane ticket, whether or not Taylor Swift is coming to town will have a big determining of what the price of that ticket is and what that hotel reservation will cost you. And I think that the same thing we will see EV charging and other electrification efforts really consolidate, not across the service territory, but within specific areas. It will create real challenges for the utilities. So if you
Yeah.
think of an older industrial area where utility hasn't made an investment in 20 or 30 years, and one guy goes out and buys a bunch of Ford F-150 Lightnings, and the guy down the street buys a couple of Rivians, the impact on the distribution network will be significant. And the question is how long will it take to the utility to respond to that change in load at a particular part of their service territory?
We see that in the time it takes when you call the utility. If you're not somebody who's dealt with them on a regular basis and you're on their Rolodex, it takes a huge amount of time to get them to get out, take a look, decide what it takes, order the transformers, and all the entire process is very lengthy and painful. And I was just talking to yesterday a bus manufacturer who said, again, I've been working on deals for 2 years that haven't come to fruition yet. And so I think the interesting part of it is you're right about the transmission piece of this. And if you think about, the utilities looking at data centers and the kind of money they make off a data center versus making nickels and dimes at a time off of EV charging, you could see why they're paying more attention to the data center piece of this at the moment. Anyway, you agree with that?
Well, not exactly. Utilities have a real challenging problem. They're certainly beholden to their shareholders appropriately. They've got a public utility or public service commission that's giving them rules of the road, and then they have expectation on the part of their customers. And so anyone who does large projects will always complain about the utility unless they really engage the utility early on. So whether one is doing a data center or one is doing a DC fast charging installation, the earlier you can involve the utility in the process, the better. At the same time, clearly some utilities are just stretched. If you're in an environment that's growing very quickly for a lot of different reasons, so you have a hurricane run through town, as one just ran through my neck of the woods, utilities are really having to satisfy a logistics challenge that's quite significant. The one thing I would add to that, Rich, is for a long time, the utility business was just about safe, reliable, and affordable energy. So they had a very clear mandate. Some utilities more responsive to their customers, some utilities less responsive to their customers. At this point in time, the standard utility model had worked well because there wasn't a lot of change. In a fast-paced environment where things are changing very quickly, the price of solar is coming down, the price of energy storage is coming down, new load is happening. The utilities are going to be hard pressed to dynamically accommodate new circumstances and conditions. And there'll be some that lead, there'll be some that lag, and many will just kind of find their way as best they can. So they're people just like us that run utilities, in other words.
Yeah, but you hit on it before. Not only is it the generating capacity, but it's the transmission system too. And that is not something that changes rapidly in this country. They are now having to make, as you said, they're having to do things at a pace that they weren't really used to doing. But with all the demand that's happening at this point, it seems like they're being forced to address those things more and more. Would you say that your business has a great deal to do with the transmission network, and how does what Evoke Systems is doing fit together with? Is it more about the pace of the pace of new equipment like new buses, trucks, and cars coming online, or is it more about what's happening on the utility side and all the challenges that go along with that in terms of timing and time of day and rates and all that good stuff?
Well, one thing I would say, Rich, it's not an either or, it really is a both end. So you really have to look really at what is the infrastructure that we provide to power EV charging, as well as what are the manufacturers doing, as well as what is the adoption rate for electric vehicles in the US. And it's very uneven depending on the state. The only nuance I would make is from our standpoint, what's happening at the transmission level or the bulk power level for us is less significant than what's happening at the distribution level. So, at the bulk power level, the timelines are much longer, the investments are much larger, and those are generally done in a 10 to 20-year horizon. At the distribution level, which is where you step down from the big towers down to distributing it to smaller entities, that's where the challenge for EV charging is actually more significant.
Interesting. So, can you give us some kind of real world situations that you've had with the fact that the software that you're providing in the charging stations has benefited and helped fleet operators to understand better what's going on and to help save them money, to help be more efficient? Can you give us some real world stories of that? We talk a lot about software and compatibility, and that's great once you get through that. But it sounds like you had some real experience in helping people with things that the average fleet manager wouldn't think of at this point in time. Can you give us some stories with that?
I'll give you three kinds of examples of where software can really, and all three are related to load management. So you may have a situation where the level of service the utility has provided will only allow you to put in 10 or 20 chargers. And you may want to put in 40 chargers, both because the rebates are generous and that's how large your fleet is. So the one thing we allow you to do with software is we allow you to meet whatever the physical constraint is on the service panel. So if it's a 400 amp panel or if it's a 600 amp panel, we allow you to have it so that you can set the charging so it will not exceed the electric service until a utility can do an upgrade for a transformer, or you want to make the investment to upgrade the service panel. So that's one area where you could reduce the capital cost. The second area, which is quite related but very different, is where you want to take advantage of time of use rates. So if you're a commercial customer and the utility says between this hour and this hour, we will charge you one price for electricity, but between this hour and this hour, the electricity will be cheaper. So with software, you can actually delay the start of a charging session, assume it meets your operational requirements to make sure a vehicle is fully charged for the next day. That's another way you can use software to basically reduce cost. A third thing you could do and I'll give you an example for that. We have a site in northern New Jersey where they have 96 chargers, and they charge during the day because it's a workplace charging environment, and they have over 600 EV chargers at that location. What we did is we capped their charging so that in each one, it's two garages. In each one of the garages, it doesn't exceed more than 150 kW in each garage. So we were able to shave their demand charges by 200 kW a day, which is a fairly significant saving for someone who's operating a lot of chargers. So those are just three simple examples where the ability for software can either drive down capital cost or operating expense for both.
Do you find a lot of situations where customers are told that a piece of equipment can do certain things in terms of it's a 30 amp or a 60 amp or whatever the rating for that is, or I'm sorry, a 30 kW or 60 kW charging station, and it has two ports, and they don't realize that they're utilizing that as a total, and the two ports are only charging half as much each. Do you see customers come back later or work with you saying, this isn't what I thought I was getting when I purchased these charging stations? Is that
Well, fortunately, in our case, because we only sell software, that's not our issue. And so that really is between the reseller who's saying, oh, this is a 60 kW charger, and you can bring two feeds to the 60 kW charger, in which case each one of the connectors will spit out 60 kilowatts, or you can bring one connection to the charger, in which case if you're charging on one, it'll be 60. If you're charging on two, it'll be 30. So that's really not our issue. If a customer were to come to us, we would indicate to them that the reseller was one who designed and specified the charger. But I'm going to give you sort of a different example because it's very pertinent. I charge at home. That's what I do. But guess what? I had to evacuate recently because of a hurricane. And so so I don't use a lot of DC fast chargers. But what I noted is when you're really down in terms of your charging, you might be charging at 120 or 140 kilowatts. But once the battery is full by 50%, the charge rate drops off pretty precipitously. So that's something that was good information for me to actually figure out how long a charging session would take. So this is one of the places where the industry is still in the process of maturing, is conveying very clearly how long it takes to charge, and also the limitation of the current battery chemistries and voltage levels in typical vehicles.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example. That's what I was driving at. So the question was a little bit ham-handed, but you answered the right question. But you were chased by the storm just recently, and so you're an EV user. What was your experience when you had to move and weren't able to use your own garage charger? What was your experience?
Well, I had no idea what to expect, Mr. Ray. So Rich, I had no idea, but it worked out well for us. There was only one situation where we had to wait for a charger because three of the chargers were offline. But in general, the chargers were available. They were easy to operate. And once I got through this manufacturer does it this way, or this charge station does it this way, and this charge station does it a little differently, it was really fine. I was actually pleasantly surprised given all the horror stories I've heard.
Yeah, well, you said it right. The three of the chargers were offline. So, I mean,
Well, that was only at one of the stations, but yes, and that was the one where I had to wait. So there were six chargers and three of them were offline. And so we did have to wait for a charger for about 10 or 15 minutes.
Right. So how involved in that exact example is, what you're giving owners, charging station owners, is that a major part of the feedback that you're providing, is the situation of being offline, and how involved are you in helping them to make certain that there's maximum uptime?
I will tell you this, it's still a sore point in the industry, to be honest. There's still a lot of gaps in regards to, and I will say this, Tesla really is setting the expectation and the gold standard for reliability. The supercharger network is very available, very much online. The new federal funding, what's called the NEVI funding, is insisting on a certain uptime that's required if for them not to claw back the investment they've had you make. So it's still an open issue. In regards to our software, we give real-time updates to the availability of the chargers. We can tell if the charger is in a fault condition. The thing we can't tell if there's damage to the cable. And so with the mobile app that we have users report, hey, the cable is damaged or the connector has been crushed because someone ran over it. And we then forward that to the reseller. And so we provide real-time visibility both to the charge station operator as well as the charge station reseller and to a field service organization identified with that location. And then we have a ticketing system to follow up. And one of the challenges in this industry is that the industry is going so fast that the field service organizations still haven't caught up with moving from installing new devices to actually doing the appropriate operations and maintenance for existing stations. So again, it's still part of the unevenness in regards to the maturity of the industry.
So as I mentioned, I come from the communications side of things. And, as I said, 30 years ago, we went through the same growing pains and situations and changing generation of equipment and all the things that are going on now. But one of the interesting parts of this is that most of my friends who were in the communications business have now moved over to EV charging. And so a really interesting sort of hike from, communications to EV charging. It's really a very similar near neighbor business. But one of the things that struck me is that there's a heavy communications aspect to this, which is why I think that there's that movement, which is if you pull up to that station and you don't have that app and there's no cell phone coverage or there's no Wi-Fi coverage, you're not charging. And so that connection, the ability to use that software, the ability to connect using an app to that charging station, because by and large, we're not using swipe cards on these things. So can you talk a little bit about that communications challenge, that piece of it, that how it affects your business?
Well, so first of all, it is a big issue in the industry. So what we call backhaul communications. How do you move from the charger back to a system that can do the authorization and authentication for payments? That said, Rich, it is one that there are very clear technological solutions that can really make it simple. So one thing is there's a new standard called plug-in charge, where when you take your connector and you plug it into your car, the car can identify itself. So but the car needs to support that functionality, and the charger needs to support that functionality, and it's still not standard. The second thing is to basically be able to support local authorization. That if there is a disruption in communications in any way, the transaction can be basically captured locally, and when communications is restored, they can dial back home and the charges can be done. That's another technical solution, unevenly implemented by various manufacturers. But so a lot of the gaps or maturation process in the industry, I think, will resolve themselves over the next 2 or 3 years. And the reason is because of the demand for consumers to want reliable experience when they come up to a charging station. If you went to a gas station and you never knew whether or not all the pumps were working, or 3 to 4 pumps were not working, you'd be pretty dissatisfied. And so that's still part of the growing pains that I do anticipate over the next 24 to 36 months, that people who haven't figured it out will no longer be in the business. We're already seeing compression in the industry. I think that will continue.
Yeah, it's a shocking situation. We did a story for our newsletter, Charged Up, about Juicebox walking away, their parent company walking away from the U.S. We hear stories about others who have a very low stock price and very little cash left, about those situations.
Well, EV Box, I don't know if you saw the news on that EV Box. EV Box is shutting down.
Yeah, that's another one. And so I saw a pretty good list the other day of companies that have already shut down or are in danger of having some problems. So, but Ray, this has been a breath of fresh air to talk about this side of it and not be, talking about the same old, same old. This is a very important aspect of it, and I hope folks who watch and listen to this will get a sense of how important the software aspect is. I thank you for being with me today, and we've been with Raymond Kaiser from Evoke Systems. And Ray, thanks again for doing this, and we'll talk again soon.
Bruce, thank you for having me.